Hi, everybody. So I'd like to welcome you to the first Saddle Road Press online conversation of 2023. And our authors today are Diane Gilliam. I've got this weird thing here. Let me see if there we go. Our Diane Gilliam, author of the new novel Linnery Stepp, and Tania Pryputniewicz, author of the memoir and poems, The Fool in the Corn. I'm going to hold these up. Oops. I have difficulty with Yes. And I love the covers too. I love these books, both of these books. You can buy Linnery Stepp and The Fool in the Corn at any bookseller online or in your neighborhood. They are distributed by Ingram everywhere. So I'm just going to start and give a little introduction to our two speakers, our two people today, and then I'm just going to back out of this. So first of all, I'm going to turn to Diane. Welcome, Diane.
Thank you.
Diane Gilliam has published 4 poetry collections, including Dreadful Wind and Rain and Kettle Bottom. Her work has earned a Pushcart Prize, the Ohioana Library Association Book of the Year in Poetry, the 2008 Chaffin Award for Appalachian Writing, and the Gift of Freedom from the Room of Her Own Foundation. She lives and writes in Akron, Ohio, and teaches in regional writing workshops and in the low residency MFA program at West Virginia Wesleyan College. This is her first novel. Linnery Stepp is narrated by 16-year-old Linny, the good daughter, who has what she calls a bad, twisted hand. When we meet Linny, she is about to be traded for her distant cousin Robbie so that he can help her father on the farm, and she can help his mother keep an eye on Aunt Hesty, the grandmother who is prone to wandering and revelations. Set in Appalachian, Kentucky in the early 1900s, illuminated by dreams, myths, and folk tales, this magical novel tracks Linny's journey, the classic woman hero's journey, through trials, terrors, and transformations, until she learns to say no to what would harm her, and yes to the wisdom of her own heart. Tania, welcome, Tania. Tania Pryputniewicz is also the author of the poetry collection November Butterfly and a rich guide to working creatively with the tarot, Heart's Compass Tarot. Discover tarot journaling and create your own cards. A graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop, Tania lives in Coronado and teaches poetry and tarot-inspired writing classes for San Diego Writers, Inc. and Antioch University's continuing education program. The Fool in the Corn is a memoir and poems beginning with a confusing, harsh, and at times even hungry childhood in a Midwestern commune led by a cult leader. Tania's brilliant musician father's mental difficulties took them there, and from there to a small town on the Russian River in California, where Tania comes of age. She writes of beginning to find herself as a poet and a tarot muse in college and at the Iowa Writers Workshop, of navigating difficult years of marriage and motherhood, and finally, the heartbreaking loss of her own mother. The image of the tarot fool, wise, innocent, and eternal adventurer weaves throughout the book. So now I'm going to turn this over to both of you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Ruth. I just wanted to say to you that I'm so grateful that you're putting Diane and I in conversation. And we were just speaking of how I met Diane 10 years ago in the desert and took a beautiful class from her. And I just want to say to you, Diane, how amazing it was to be your fairy tale student and then see you absolutely doing such a beautiful job with the form, such a pathfinding way. I've called it in my mind Appalachian fairy tale, which in which a protagonist walks in two worlds. And I'm still personally just bathed in the book's healing aura that it created for me. As I said in a post earlier today, I cried as a reader. And then I marveled as a writer, how many stories do we get where we have a female protagonist who comes up against and overcomes physically and psychologically annihilating threats just to face down her deepest fears. And she finds what she needs, concrete path to different forms of love. It just made me weep. There's so much generosity in this fairy tale. I loved how the setting is not only nature, but these dual sort of hinterlands of sleep and waking dream time, and you move seamlessly between all these worlds. Also, we get to see how the secret traumas of the ancestors end up making decisions that maybe Linny doesn't understand initially, but it helps her reckon eventually with her past and her present in order to find herself. So I just wanted to start by asking you about your title, Linnery Stepp, and a little bit about the cover image as well.
Well, thank you for being such a perceptive reader. Oh, that didn't sound right, did it? You know what I mean. Thank you for that reading. I really struggled with the title till the very last minute. The very last minute in that room that Dawn is in, I came up with the final title. I knew that Linny's name had to be part of the title because the book is so much about her deciding who she is. So it needed to be her name. The whole time I was writing the book, I referred to it as Linny's book, and I still call it Linny's book, but I didn't think that would work as the title. Someone suggested to me Linny's Choice, which was a working title for a long time, but with Sophie's Choice hanging out there, no, that couldn't stay. And Linny all by herself didn't seem to have enough ballast. So just in the last minute, I don't know what, visitation, I thought to add her last name onto the title. And to me, it gives it enough ballast. It gives her more substance than just the first name. Plus, it's significant that is the name that she has at the end of the story. And it's a family name for me. My mother's father was a Stepp, and our home place was on Stepp Mountain. So it worked that way for me. I was visiting with Ruth and Dawn, and because I am a quilter, Dawn got out quilts they had for me to look at, and this is one of them. And he had taken a number of beautiful pictures of the quilt. And there's a quilt that figures into the story that's made as a gift. And I had a tiny hitch because the quilt that was made as a gift was made out of boys' shirts. So I thought the quilt on the cover had to be a boys' shirt quilt, but they're not that lovely. And so I wrote it in. So I wrote this quilt into the story before all was said and done, so we could have it. So that is how all that happened. How about your book too, Tania? When I saw the cover the first time, I was instantly transported to Sunport. And I remember on the way home from Ghost Ranch, one of those times we were waiting together for the planes home and you got your pencils out while we were sitting there. How did you arrive at your title?
That's a beautiful memory, Diane. I was picturing, I think I ended up drawing a multicolored heart out of that color drawing in the air.
Yes, I remember. Yes, yes.
Beautiful moment. So the artwork, yeah. I guess I'll start with the title. Like the Fool
Yeah.
is Born for me was, the book had many different titles because I worked on it for so long. At one point, I was calling it in my mind, Healing the Desire World. I wanted so badly to be healed or to understand my journey. And eventually, it sort of reflects the whole arc of feelings about why we ended up at the commune. And it changed. It transformed over time, but the Fool holds so many different feelings and interpretations, from the innocent beginner to, were you foolish for going to a commune? And were my parents the fool? Was the leader the fool? Who is the fool? And I liked that question is in the title. So as the reader reads and I travel, I get to think about what that means. And
I loved, when I was back again through this afternoon, I realized how beautifully there's a poem near the end. It's one of your mother poems where you lie in bed with her and she turns to look at you and say things to you. And she says the thing about the commune, that she was not sorry about that. And the last two lines of that poem, probably you know them by heart. If you don't leave, how does it go?
If you don't leave what you know, how can you grow?
How can you grow?
And and like you with I got some inspiration for the cover art just in conversation with Ruth and Dawn, and we had different artwork, and I got some encouragement to just give it a try. And the girl in the middle of the corn wasn't there originally. I was reading a beautiful book, Braiding Sweetgrass, and there's a section about the tiny kernels of corn and how each one has its own silk tendril trying to reach the sun.
Oh, I did not know that.
And it just felt like that was also part of what I was trying to do in writing the poems, was to reach that part of us that's always going up towards the sun. So the woman inside the corn came last in the drawing, but she sort of revealed herself to me as I was coloring in each of the little corn kernels.
I get a real great mother, great daughter feeling from that image too. Almost that ear of corn is almost womb-like. And that seems to stand so well for so much in your book, which has so much to do with the epigraph that opens the book. Do you want to read it?
Sure. The Rachel quote from the tarot, 78 degrees of wisdom. For the fool, no difference exists between possibility and reality. And that was from 78 Degrees of Wisdom, a book of tarot by Rachel Pollack.
That's such a beautiful North Star bit of language there. That constant navigation between, I'm thinking of I'm so glad you're calling it a memoir in poems, because it really gives the sense of a whole life. And all through the poems, I get such a sense of this person, the speaker, just in constant navigation and negotiation with regard to what she's been taught, what she feels responsible for, what she believes in, even though it shifts through the course of the book. And the inner voice, the inner truth that traces that midway between those two poles. If we know they're not poles, but between reality and possibility. Just a real sense of someone in search of wholeness, guided by her own innate wisdom, her native wisdom, and what she knows to be true. And beliefs can change and shift, but there's like a spine of truth all through the experiences and the stories in the books that just won't be put down.
Diane, when you were speaking about your titles for your book, and you said you were calling it Linnery's book, I thought about how the Linnery becomes, she finds her world in the book when she's owned, our Linnery, like she's named and taken in by Pearl. And
Yeah.
that's such a, I was just struck by how your book starts us in the middle of the absolute abandonment of being traded. You start us right in the middle.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And then we get to watch her grow and change. And there's a scene in the kitchen where she is now in the new home where she's been shuttled off. And I love that passage in there. Would you read us some of that?
Sure.
Passage?
This is at the beginning, near the beginning of chapter 2. Linnery's first day at the Chandler house. Pearl is the mother of the family. Virgil is the father. Then there's Aunt Hesty, who's the grandmother figure, and there's a boatload of boys. From the start, I got up when I heard Pearl moving around to help her with breakfast. That first morning when I woke up, I couldn't feel my hands and feet. I knew I had to get up out of the bed, get dressed, and walk out of the room, but there wasn't no part of my body willing to believe it was so. I didn't even know where to stand when I got into the kitchen. Their kitchen is in the front of the house, which faces east like ours, but with no mountain close by, so it gets the morning sun. I couldn't hardly believe how nice that made the kitchen feel. Pearl was standing at a long table set under the window with her back to me, mixing up biscuits. She didn't hear me come in, so I stood there a minute, just looking. She's shorter than me and softer looking than me and Mama in her body, almost like she's got pillows inside her dress. Pardon me. Pearl's hair was in a knot at the back of her neck, like Mama always tries for, but it was a nubby little twist, and it had a lot more gray in it than Mama's. I hadn't thought about Virgil and Pearl being older than Mom and Daddy, but me and Robbie were about the same, and he was their next to least, while I was Mom and Daddy's oldest. I opened my mouth to say good morning, but then I closed it. I was trying to think what Robbie called Mama and Daddy. but I couldn't remember him calling them anything at all except for his yes, sirs, and no thank you, ma'ams. We wasn't brought up to call grown-ups by their first names, so I didn't know. I felt my shoulders sag with how hard it all felt just then, but then I stood back up straight. Maybe I wasn't a grown-up, but I wasn't a child neither. And if I was going to live there, I had to know how to call them. I put my bad hand behind my back, then I put my good hand behind my back too, and held on to it. Then I brought them both out in front and covered up my bad hand a little with my good one, across my middle. Good morning, I said. Well, good morning, honey, she said, turning halfway around. You're just in time to crack eggs for me. You would think I might not be good at cracking eggs, but I'm pretty fast at it since I can pick one up with my good hand, crack it on the edge of the bowl, and set the shells off to one side, all without changing hands. I set into doing it. Well, now, she said, isn't that something? She took the bowl from me, scrambled the eggs up real quick, and poured them into a hot skillet just starting to smoke with bacon grease on the stove. There was coffee making too. It smelled good in there. She handed back the empty bowl, and I held it under the edge of the table with my good hand and raked the broken shells into it with my bad hand. I swallowed and kept my eyes on the broken shells in the bowl. I can crack 'em pretty good, I said, but I'm not so good for gathering. I can't lift the hens up quick enough with my bad hand to snatch the eggs out with my good one. They get me about every time. I almost always come out bleeding. We can't have that, she said. Walty gathers for me now. He can keep on. It won't hurt him a bit. I took that in. I straightened up with the bowl full of broken eggshells crooked in my right arm. I couldn't quite look at her. I don't know what to call you, I said. She looked up then from what she was doing, cutting out rounds of biscuit dough with a glass. She stood there a minute with one hand still flat on the patted out dough and the other hand dangling that floury lipped glass. She looked at me, looked at all of me kind of head to foot. It was that interested look. Pearl, she said. Pearl be just fine. And that was my first penny's worth of choosing. I would ask when I didn't know. I would say what hurt me. I barely had time to think that thought when I heard a ruckus somewhere through the house. A tabby cat ran squalling and slipping and sliding into the kitchen, and right behind her, an old woman with a straw broom. I got quick out of the way, backing up flat as I could against the work table. Damn stinking cat, she kept saying. And all the while she's whacking that broom down around on the floor like the cat's still there, which it sure ain't, cats being smart as they are. It had jumped up on the work table into the leavings of the biscuit dough and on out the window. Then she bent over from the waist and started poking with the broom underneath everything in the room there was to poke under, saying things to that cat I couldn't quite make out. She stood up, holding the broomstick in one hand, down at her side, level, like a man holds a shotgun. Damn thing pissed on my rug, she said to Pearl. Then she seen me. Cover your eyes if you need to, girl, she said. I'm about to kill me a cat. No.
It's such a beautiful sensory rich scene, Diane. And I love that part where she says it was that interested look again, because Linny's not used to being seen. And
Yeah.
she's beginning here. She's in between, not the girl, not the woman, but she's in a house where she's feeling her way towards who her helpers are. And I love that introduction of Hesty chasing the cat around the room with the broom.
Yeah. Yeah. I I sort of fell in love with Pearl as I was writing. The moment when Pearl tells Linny, Pearl will be just fine. She can call her by her name. I kind of fell in love. For me, I kind of fell in love with Pearl right at that moment. Such an easy answer.
There's sort of, when did Hesty show up for you as a character when you were writing? Or was she there all along?
Before I had any real words on paper, I knew she was there. I'd carried around the idea of an Aunt Hesty for a long time. I had read a bit about Hestia, the goddess of the hearth and innermost things. And I had thought, that sounds a little bit like a mountain name, only if that was in Kentucky, we'd call her Aunt Hesty. She'd be Aunt Hesty. And so I'd been carrying that name around for a couple of years, at least by then. But I knew the basic outlines of the book by the time my plane landed back home in Akron, that last Ghost Ranch time that we had. So I knew her before I touched ground that time.
Structurally, it's a gem of a book, Diane. I'm so in awe of the way all of the pieces work together, and there's nothing wasted, and there's so much tension all the way throughout, and you balance the tension with Linny's getting her needs met in this miraculous way. I don't know how you do it, but I'm just so moved. I feel like your poet self came to bear on the fairy tale, and I feel it all the way throughout the book.
I'm so glad. And I think that it might be a little surprising to see the kinship between each of our books, but I think that they have very much in common. As I was reading again this afternoon and thinking about just that matter, because in both there's a seeker.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that my book shows a little slice of that life. And your book starts in that place, but it runs the whole course of your lifetime. But what floors me is the level of insight that even in the earliest poems, the speaker has about what is going on. And so I thought that if you wouldn't mind, I would ask you to read Firstborn.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, so this poem is in that first section about the commune, and I was there from age 5 to 11. So this is Firstborn. Coatless in the snow, I hide behind the farmhouse, Whatever hunts my father, hunts my mother through him. I'm next. Between empty cornfields and my body on the only tree, a snowy owl pivots her plush orb of head left, quick right, without altering her grip. I practice till the moon rises and I no longer feel my feet. Upstairs, my electric blanket crackles when I spin. Brother and peripheral vision sparks too. Under our beds, the dim twin dials blink orange. I sweat in the wealth of heat, dream of orphan dwarves, underground sun, black-eyed Susans with their velvet centers brown, petals wet. My father stands receiving, his palms butterflied gold. What hunts us isn't him, but flows through him as through the power lines overhead, on rows of parallel steel lattice towers with outstretched limbs. By morning I forget, and the fear returns. Oh, Papa, with your blue mantle of rage, inherited, and no angel to carry it.
Mm. That's an amazing poem. What hunts us isn't him, but flows through him. I think in many ways that sets up what happens through the rest of the book. What hunts, that predator, the predator loose in the world, whether it's the outer world or the inner psychic world, never gives up the hunt. And that feels to me such an apt image for the way all through the book, the speaker is really fighting at every turn for what she knows to be, for what she knows to be true.
Diane, I'm thinking about Linny and how the questions pull her from the house, and she ends up she goes into the forest on her way to ask a question to a family she trusts. I love that it's the question inside of her that gets met in the outside world when she walks into the forest. Do you want to read from some of the Laurel scene or talk about it a little bit?
Yes. And before I do, let me say something about two of your poems that are beside each other. The first tarot reading, the poem that ends with the line about bring back, I think Ruth quoted it, bring back whatever you dare.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much of the archetypal, but the feminine archetypal hero journey in that bit of language. And I think that's what happens to Linny when she goes into the Laurel. She wants her friend, so she needs to go walk in the woods. And everything goes smoothly until she gets to the Laurel. And in the Appalachian Mountains, and probably all up and down the range, there are these things called laurel hells. That's what we call them anyway. And it's where the laurel grows so thick and so dense that almost anybody in the area will have a story about somebody that went into a laurel hell and never came back out. Just was never found again. And so this is a moment when she, on some level, she knows there's nothing for her to do but go in, that she can't go around. All she can do is go in. And do you by any chance, Tanya, have a page range for me on that?
Let me see my note, my tabs here. Mhm.
Ruth, do you remember which chapter is the Laurel chapter, the name?
I see 133, right, is where she says there's no path to follow, not the way I thought there would be, and I could not go back the way I came.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
before 140, somewhere in there.
Okay, I got it. So she finds the time is coming when the farming season is going to be over. And the question is going to arise about where are Linny and Robbie, who's the boy who was traded, where are they going to be when the farming season is over? And Linny knows she wants to stay, but she doesn't know yet if that matters enough, if that's enough to let her stay. So here's where she confronts the Laurel. I tried to keep a cool head, but I needed to keep walking. I didn't know if I was trying to walk away or to or through. I felt in my body right then how Aunt Hesty must have felt all the times I'd heard her say she needed to walk. I walked back around the bend and stood looking into the Laurel. Back to look at the tree again, back to the Laurel. It didn't look so thick there on the edge. I tried to remember the map in the post office at Painesville, and it seemed to me the Marcus back field wasn't but a quarter mile or less straight ahead from where I was standing. Everybody said to don't even think about it. Daddy would say all the time, keep a cool head, Linny. I turned myself around to head back home, and everything started rolling around inside me. They would want Robbie back. Of course they would. They would let me go. If Pearl had let Robbie go, why not me? That was still the deal. I would have to go back home, and they would never make room for me to be anything other than what I'd always been in that house. Captured is what I'd be. No, I am not doing that. I thought I would throw up when I heard myself read those words, like I could say what was a done deal and what was not. My head was hot. Everything that had made me mad or hurt my feelings or scared me since the day all this started gathered itself on the path back the way I'd come, and swarmed all over me like the poison ivy on those poplars. I squatted down, wrapped my arms around my knees, and cried. That's where Daddy's cool head got me, falling down in the road and crying. But just for a minute, I stood up and shook my head to clear it. I pressed the heels of my hands up against my eyes to stop crying. There was no path to follow, not the way I thought there would be, and I could not go back the way I came. I had to know some things for myself. I had to find out what I was going to do about it all. It wasn't about getting to Delcy anymore, needing somebody else's ears to be able to hear myself. The Laurel had tripped me up long enough for everything, my whole story, everything I was afraid of, to catch up with me. When I looked at the Laurel hell, I was looking at the shape of my life. I couldn't go back from it. I had to go through. And she does go through. And the voice of the predator is strong with her when she gets in there, and she gets lost, and she gets turned around. But there's a helper who shows up at the end. In fairy tales, one of the only constants in fairy tales across time and space is that if you have a helpful animal and you are kind to it, you will succeed. And so when she and her friend Elsie first met, there was a little dog there, and they were cooling off at the pump, and they gave him water and helped him cool off at the pump too. And so Delcy gets the idea to send that little dog into the woods to look for her, and he finds her. And
So beautiful. I that was one of the places where I just cried. And your structural beauty, Diane, is the way that all through the book we stay with Linny. And then you'll tell a scene from one point of view and leave it, just like the Laurel scene. And then you come back and fill it in again. There's a second telling of that scene, and we get a little more information with the layering. And I saw you doing that with the fairy tales within the fairy tales in this book. Hesty tells Linny a story about her own life with just enough detail so Linny can recognize herself, but it's also kind of a fairy tale. So I love that you end up delineating the way a fairy tale can just radiate through her life. And in order to see herself, she's a dreamer too. So she lives in that world of symbols a little bit like Hesty does. And I just found that so beautiful, how you move so slowly and generously through the story, and then you'll tell it again, fill in a little more, a little more. It's so satisfying, and that's why I feel like this book satiates a hunger for beauty, generosity. It's amazing.
well, I think there was not a little bit of wish fulfillment, going on as I was writing that book. I wrote the family that, I wanted. I loved Pearl. I loved Aunt Hesty. I'd have married one of them Chandler boys in a New York minute. Yes. I had to rough it up a little bit before all was said and done. It was just a little too much. But I think that's a natural thing that happens in the process of writing. And it must have been kind of the same for you, I imagine, because whatever the threads are that are the main threads in a person's life, they never go away. I mean, they twist off here and they get wrapped around here and everything, but they never stop shaping who you are. And it's not necessarily in a warping kind of way. I felt, one of the very first things I noticed in your book was in the dedication. You say, and for the children of intentional communities everywhere. And I thought, intentional community, what a beautiful bit of language that is. And I recognize that as a generous bit of language that honored the intentions, even when the intentions, go awry. And there are plenty of ways that it went awry. And I wanted to ask you about a certain place in your book that felt pivotal to me. I am looking at the Page of Wands at the Wellness Fair first tarot reading. Not only that one, but I'm noticing how what follows immediately are the poetry rules. And I mean, what a perfectly beautiful title. First, I think poetry rules, yes, because that's where the Iowa workshop is. And I think Heartland, yes, because that's where the poetry is. And I've heard stories about Iowa before. So, you know, I wasn't shocked or anything. But what a shift. What a place to find an obstacle in the place that you go to learn to say what it is that you need to say. So I wondered, would you read those two poems like just together, one and then the other one?
Thank
And
you.
then, yeah.
I'd love to. Page of the Wellness Fair, first tarot reading. So this was at UC Davis, and I was an undergraduate. Under fluorescent glare, between the blender display and the seed catalogs, a woman shuffles a deck of cards. My friends pass her, but I stop, pay, sit on the cold metal folding chair. Each card back bears the same pattern: blue mountaintops, tree tips, drowned steeple, scales of a leviathan fish, a Pied Piper's hidden door. This is you, she says, after laying out the deck face up. Our querent of, and it begins, the descent into the Page of Wands and her land, which I can occupy at will. Snug hot hat, scarf at neck, vest threaded shut with a leather cord, cattails behind shoulder, a blossoming walking staff inscribed with rowan berries. You must bring back without apology all there. So there was a helper, right, in the tarot deck. And
Yes.
so beautifully articulated, up comes new obstacles and surprising territory.
Yes.
So the second poem is Poetry Rules in the Heartland. And here I'm a graduate student in Iowa City, 1992 to 1994 was my workshop. 1, the land, the corn itself, triggers the panic attack. Miles of dank green leaves, cup stems in field after field around the classroom. 14 years since the commune and I've survived, earned this spot in seminar. The others introduce themselves, mention the right poets. I list a book on the afterlife in Dion Fortune's mystical Kabbalah. During critique, it is established that past lives don't grant you permission to speak with authority from that life's point in history, that if your father tunes pianos, it's best to use metaphors of the tuning fork. Where else, if not in poetry, might past lives find witness, I wonder? But listen, outlier in a new field of corn. At night, I dream with the velocity of a shaman's apprentice, only there's no shaman I trust, nor do I wish to be anyone's prophet but my own. 2, I meet Jane, the visiting poet on the street, while the dusk rain fastens ginkgo fans and a sparrow to the sidewalk at our feet. We agree, I'll take in the bird. In my basement flat, a coiled bent metal arm holds up the hot second sun of my writing lamp. Sparrow writes herself, tiny stars of feet against my palm, heft of her body taking to the sky at the stair top, like Jane, reciting from August Zero by heart at the faculty reading, pacing the rim of the stage, curating an adrenaline vacillating between
Oh, no.
Tanya, if she's right now, why don't you finish it, Diane?
Okay. Reciting from August Zero by heart at the faculty reading, pacing the rim of the stage, curating an adrenaline, vacillating between fear she'd forget a stanza and fear she'd fall into our laps. Later, as my thesis advisor, she'll remind me. Tanya, are you there?
Yeah,
You say that last part.
You chose to be an artist so you could be free. The fear of falling off of Zoom. Thank you.
So, I mean, all of us, I'm supposing, here are writers and have had plenty of experience in workshops, probably all kinds of experiences. And it reminds me of another poem called Eclipse, where you say, I must stop worrying. My husband says I must. And so I feel in these two poems, a matter of authority. In the first one with the tarot cards, I have the sense, was this so, Tanya, that's where like the bottom must have dropped out after that tarot reading for you. Was it like that?
It was. I could talk to myself through the cards. So after the experience with a spiritual leader that was confusing, here was a place where I could play and learn to hear my own voice.
Yeah.
And
yes. And whatever the portal is to the other side, to the unseen, that's always operating around us. There are many portals, and we all find the one that opens best for us. And I think when we walk through it, there's no turning back.
just
you
like
can't
hell.
Yes, you can't not know anymore that there is something on the other side that is on your side and wants to tell you as much as it can of what you need to know to get through. And I love the way that in those two poems, they bounce back and forth from the tarot. That is that first, which I felt like, to me, like the first sounding of the voice that calls your name and says, you. and then the workshop that says, can't do that. You can't do that. And then the teacher that comes back around, and there's not critique, there's a baby bird. And she sees you. She can see you and reminds you of what you need reminded of. It's just, it feels like a beautiful freedom there. And I think
thank you, Diane. I was thinking when you were talking about helpers, I thought, oh, where's my helper animal? And then you just found it for me. It's the bird.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a hopeful, happy way to stop and see. Ruth, did you want to open it for questions or ask anything? We're at 5 till, so I'm just checking in, really. or yeah, questions can be put in the chat.
You're mute.
Ruth, you're muted.
Okay, there we go. We could, you could do it in chat, or you could just raise your hand, whatever you would like to do. Anybody? No? Okay. Okay. Does either of you want to, do you have anything that you haven't said that you wanted to say tonight?
I just want to thank you, Diane, for writing the book.
Oh,
It's so beautiful. I feel like this is a book that will help so many of us see ourselves and our journey, no matter where we are. And there's a beautiful thing in here about mothers everywhere, and the way that Linny transformed and is able to mother others in this book is profoundly moving. And it's that reminder that no matter how old we are, we can grow and learn and nurture.
yes. And that's what I would say too. When I started writing Linny, I at first I was imagining it as a young adult novel, but it doesn't have that cool factor, you know. Don't know young adults now. But really what I wanted to say was just exactly that there are mothers everywhere, and they are watching out for you. You know, we all have our eyes open, and it doesn't matter whose body you came from. The young ones are all ours. But also for each other, because I'm a grandmother now, but that doesn't mean I don't need mothering every once in a while. And so I think that is one of the things that we can do for each other. Is
there is a question from Annette. Hi, Annette. Saying, I had been told publishers would not be interested in memoir through poetry. You seem to have overcome that. How? Tania, would you?
Well, Ruth Thompson and Don Mitchell are solving that problem. Yeah, I just think we write what we need to write, and then we name it. And part of my naming was to claim it as a memoir and poems, and then figure out how to defend that, because defending seems to be part of the conversation around writing. But I think we can find a home for our work, just like Diane was speaking to the generosity. We can find a home.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Jane Ben-Julian asks, what is next for you, Diane? More fiction? Question mark.
I think I have. I'm pretty sure I have the pages of the next poetry collection ready to go. I'm not ready to go, but written, you know. And I got a very encouraging note from a friend of mine about Linny, which she hasn't even read yet, but she's one of those people that is just sure you're the most brilliant thing in the world that she's ever heard of. And I thought, when I was on the grant, I also wrote a novel in poems about Winco girls, about Pearlie and Edith May from Kettle Bottom.
Mm.
And that's been in a drawer for a long time. But I almost took a notion that I could write that as a conventional novel. I could unpoem it and flesh it out and see what happened.
They are wonderful characters for anybody who's read Kettle Bottom. They are just wonderful. Yeah, that would really be fun.
Yeah, I think it could be. And if I could just keep going, if I just can keep going, then I'm happy.
Please do. Please do. We're right at 4:00, but we could stay a few minutes after, but I know some people probably need to log off the call. But yeah, thank you so much for coming out and
Everybody-
spending time.
Yes.
And
thank you.
I think we both, Tanya's had a turn to say this part way, and I want to say it the rest of the way. I wouldn't have done Lenny without Ruth.
Oh, thank you.
I would have left it in a drawer. I was so tentative about it, and for some reason it's been hard for me to let it go. But Ruth and Dawn together, I can't really even put words to
Thank you both.
the magic that, to the opening that they made for me to feel like this was something that could happen. Thank
Well,
you.
I love both these books so much, so it's been a joy.